Good morning, I'm Gretchen Ho. It is a Monday. We're coming to you live on this 28th day of July, bringing you Morning Matters because your mornings matter. Let's get to the stories that matter today. President Bongbong Marcos delivers his fourth State of the Nation address today, marking the midpoint of his term. Marcos is expected to report on key promises like the 20 peso rice, transport buildup, and the POGO ban. He's also expected to clarify the government's stance on online gambling and justify his recent tariff deal with the United States. The president has also been urged to provide updates on flooding, infrastructure projects, and anti-corruption drive. Malacanang said Marcos is focused on showing what his government has done and what is next. We are in the morning of the president's fourth State of the Nation address. Let's now head on over to Malacanang for updates on the president's preparations for his SONA. Mobile journalist Julie Baiza is now reporting to us live on the ground. Julie, kamusta naman ang preparations ng presidente at ano nga asahan natin ngayong araw?
Gretchen, the President and the Palace is ready for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s fourth State of the Nation address. Kagabi naglabas ng video ang Pangulo at ang Palasyo na ipinapakita yung naging paghahanda ng Pangulo. He was joined by different officials from the Presidential Office. The President's schedule has been pretty tight lately, as we all know, na nagkaroon siya ng state visit or official visit sa United States. Recently doon nga nasabi niya na meron siyang loss na 4 days doon sa kanyang preparation. So kailangan nga daw paghandaan at bawiin yan. As for his speech, sinabi ni PBBM na it would be a little different from the previous SONA speech kasi iba-iba naman daw yung estado ng nation sa bawat taon. So iba-iba rin yung kanyang iuulat at ire-report. PBBM added na magkakaroon daw siya ng pagdidiscuss o tatalakayin niya yung iba't ibang proyekto ng administrasyon. He also mentioned that he would focus on programs na initiate ng kanyang administrasyon at mga plano pang tapusin hanggang sa end ng kanyang termino. Sa ngayon, Gretchen, medyo maulan itong umaga natin dito sa Palasyo at naghihintay tayo ng update from different officials kung ano ba yung mga last-minute preparations na ginagawa ng Pangulo.
Julie, kung matatandaan mo sa kanyang huling SONA, may pasabog ang Pangulo tungkol na lang doon sa POGO ban. May aasahan ba tayo? May naririnig ka ba dyan na magiging bombshell announcement from the President?
Actually, matunog na nga na ilang araw or linggo na nga pinag-uusapan kung magkakaroon ba ng sagot ang Pangulo tungkol naman doon sa online gaming na marami nang humihiling na ipaban yan. Pero consistently sinasabi ng Palasyo na kailangan niyang pag-aralan. Even si PBBM tinanong siya, ano yung pinaka magiging pasabog kumbaga sa kanyang fourth SONA. Sinabi nga niya, wag siyang i-preempt kumbaga, parang intayin kung anong magiging ulat niya sa bayan.
Patungkol naman sa impeachment, nung Friday lang lumabas itong hatol ng Korte Suprema, yun kaya may babanggit din.
Inaasahan natin na magbabanggit, hindi lang si PBBM, other palace officials, inaasahan natin na magsasalita tungkol dyan. Kasi ang sabi nila nung nakaraan, nire-review pa or iniintay pa kung ano yung, nire-review pa daw yung buong naging desisyon. Kaya hindi pa sila nakapagbigay ng anumang matindi, kumbagang, or solid statement.
Ang isa sa mga tinitignan ay dito sa kanyang speech ay kung gaano kahaba. Kung titignan mo, Julie, yung first SONA ni President Bongbong Marcos noong July 2022 ay 1 hour 14 minutes. Kasunod niyan yung pangalawa, 1 hour 11 minutes. Yung susunod, 1 hour 22. Ano kaya ang length ng kanyang speech mamaya?
Naitanong na rin sa kanya yan previously na kung magiging mahaba ba o mas maiksi. Ang sinasabi kasi lagi ng PCOC, PBBM, gusto niya straight to the point. Gusto niya parang as much as possible talagang isang oras or konti lang ilagpas sa isang oras ng kanyang SONA para hindi nga rin daw natatabunan or hindi nawawala yung interest ng publiko. So nasa ganyan lang possible na mag-range siya ng 1 hour and 10 minutes to 1 hour and 30 minutes. Mahaba na yun para sa Pangulo. And minsan din kasi yung nagpapahaba, of course, yung kapag may mga standing ovation, like last year doon sa POGO ban, medyo matagal yung reaksyon ng mga mambabatas na nandoon sa loob ng plenary na pumalakpak sila at inintay bago ulit matapos. And ngayon wala tayong inaasahan na mahabang seremonya bago pumasok ang Pangulo doon sa plenary. Kasi gagawin nga ginawa ng simple itong kanyang fourth State of the Nation address. And inaasahan din natin sa coverage na hindi masyadong magiging komplikado. Ang magdidirect actually ay yung in-house director ng RTVM.
Okay. Julie, bilang panghuli, what time do we expect the president to leave the presidential palace to head on over to the Batasan?
Usually umaalis ang Pangulo around 3 to 3:30 p.m. Ang Malacanang press corps nandoon na sa Batasan noon, and binibigyan na lang kami ng heads up kung kailan siya nakaalis dito.
Alright, maraming salamat sa iyo, Julie. Buti na lang hindi binabayo ang Malacanang sa likod mo. It's a good sign. Hopefully, the weather lets up. We have mobile journalist Julie Baiza reporting us first and live from Malacanang. Now, let's move on over to the preparations at the Senate. We have mobile journalist Merimon Reyes with the latest. Merimon, what is the atmosphere like there right now? How are senators preparing for the opening of the 20th Congress?
Good morning, Gretchen. Around 10 o'clock a.m., the session of the Senate under the 20th Congress will formally open, and part of the agenda would be the election for Senate leadership. So that would include the position for Senate presidency, Senate President pro tempore, and Senate Majority Leader. So later on, we will find out if Senate President Chis Escudero will continue with his leadership, or if Senator Tito Soto, as vouched by several lawmakers, also would become Senate Minority Leader, or if there would be a turnaround when it comes to the votes of the senators. When it comes to the preparations before President Marcos' State of the Nation address, Senate President Escudero also ordered for the removal of the red carpet, because as we know, in previous years, there is a red carpet here wherein the lawmakers would have a media photo opportunity gracing in their outfits. So this is in light of the recent typhoons and floodings, and several lawmakers also called for the simplicity of the ceremony, and including Senator Loren Legarda, Senator J.B. Ejercito, and they also said that people should focus on things that matter most. So later on the SONA, they're expecting that President Marcos would be tackling major infrastructure projects and flood control measures given the recent typhoons and habagats. Pero so far, dito sa likuran natin, di pa natin nakikita yung ilang mga mambabatas. Around 8:30, posible nga pumunta na sila dito, and possibly makarinig na rin tayo kung ano nga ba ang gagawin ng Senado ngayon with the impeachment case against Vice President declared by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. Gretchen.
Okay, Merimon, I see some people there at your back. Do we have any indications as to what the senators are going to be wearing in, a simpler and more austere State of the Nation address?
Yes, Gretchen. Actually, so far, dito sa likuran natin, karamihan pa dito ang suot pa nila ay mga Filipiniana. Pero what we are expecting later on, na pag pumunta na dito ang ilang mga senador at senadora, is either napakasimple na lamang ng kanilang mga kasuotan at hindi na ito magagarbo tulad ng nakita natin sa mga lumipas na taon. Pero since hindi pa natin sila nakikita dito sa likuran natin, we are still expecting either they would be in their business attires, or possibly in the modest or the most or the simplest Filipinianas na pwede nilang masuot.
Ay, bilang panghuli, Merimon, what time should we expect the result of that Senate presidency race? Mainit na laban yan bago pa yung SONA mismo. Matagal nang inaantayan.
Tama yan, Gretchen. At yung biyahe pa mula dito sa Senado sa Pasay, papunta nga doon sa Batasan, might take around an hour. So inaasahan natin pag nagsimula na yung kanilang session by 10 o'clock a.m., hopefully before lunch, matatapos na ito. Makikita natin yung results ng kanilang election for Senate leadership, at sabay-sabay na nga silang tutungo sa Batasan for the SONA. Gretchen.
That's correct, because the 20th Congress officially opens rather today in its first regular session, and both the Senate President and the House Speaker will be elected on this day before the State of the Nation address. Maraming salamat sa iyo, mobile journalist Merimon Reyes, for reporting to us from the Senate in Pasay. Coming right up, the boxing ring for the charity match went on with an empty corner as Davao City Acting Mayor Baste Duterte failed to appear. He is now demanding a new fight date, arguing it should be a raw, pure fistfight stripped of cameras and gloves. And while respecting the Supreme Court's decision, Speaker Romualdez confirms the House will challenge the ruling that declared the impeachment complaint against Vice President Duterte unconstitutional, stripped of cameras. All that and more when Morning Matters returns after a quick break. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here on One News. Some lawmakers insist that Vice President Sara Duterte's impeachment trial should push through despite the Supreme Court's decision on its unconstitutionality. House Speaker Martin Romualdez, meanwhile, said the Congress will challenge the ruling. Here is the report.
Senator Bato de la Rosa exclaimed hallelujah following the Supreme Court's decision to declare the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte unconstitutional. He said the Holy Spirit defeated the forces of evil. Meanwhile, for another ally of the Vice President, Senator Amy Marcos, the fight appears to be over. She says the Supreme Court ruling should be respected and it's time to stop politicking and do the work. One of the petitioners, Attorney Israelito Torreon, also welcomed the ruling, calling it a victory for the people. But Senator Risa Hontiveros expressed disappointment. The senator questioned how the one-year bar rule could be considered violated when there was only a single impeachment case brought to the Senate. Senator Bam Aquino believes the impeachment trial should push through.
Handa na kaming dinggin ang lahat ng ebidensya para makapagdesisyon ng patas bilang mga hukom. Kaya dapat ituloy na yung impeachment trial.
Senator Joel Villanueva believes the majority should still have the final say. The senator said it's up to the senator judges within the impeachment court to discuss and decide what happens next. Senator Tito Soto, for his part, wants to hear what the House of Representatives has to say.
Merong nag-a-advise sa akin na pwede raw namin pwedeng i-disregard ng Senate yung Supreme Court decision. Because it tramples over the work of the Senate na kahiwalay. Separate body kami.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Martin Romualdez said the Congress respects the decision of the High Court, but they will file a motion for reconsideration.
Well, we are in the process of reading the decision of the court, and of course we shall respect the decision of the court, but we'll also exhaust our remedies, which is we'll also be preparing a motion for reconsideration.
An MR?
Yes, within 15 days of our official receipt.
Mm-hmm. But it's a unanimous decision, sir, Mr. Speaker.
Well, we hope that there could be probably some refinements on the decision.
Joining us this morning to weigh in on that Supreme Court decision, we have Professor Paulo Tamase from the UP College of Law, all the way from Brazil. Maraming salamat for being with us here.
Hi, good morning, Gretchen, and to your listeners.
Okay, Prof, we do know that Senior Associate Marvic Leonen is the ponente of that SC decision, and he says in the press release, on top of it, our fundamental law is clear. The end does not justify the means. There is a right way to do the right thing at the right time. And this is what the rule of just law means. Mabibigat ang kanyang mga salita doon. Una-una, did you expect that decision, and do you agree with it?
Well, I think in terms of whether we expected the decision, the way that the Supreme Court decides these cases is often a black box. So really, we don't know. We can't expect often how the court will decide the case. I know that some commentators have pointed out to the fact that 13, I think, of the 15 are appointees of former President Duterte. I don't think it matters as much in the final analysis. What I think was surprising was the timing. And it's because these petitions were filed in February. And for the most part, except for the last 2 or 3 weeks, the Supreme Court wasn't really acting on the petition. And then suddenly, just before the SONA starts and the dates that the Senate has already committed to start trial, we have the Supreme Court issuing this decision. And just to appreciate how record-breaking for this particular court the speed is, this is the same court, for example, that took years to decide the province of Sulu case regarding the inclusion of Sulu in the ARMM. Several important petitions pending before the court had yet to be decided. And so this one, considering its importance, without any oral argument or without extensive argumentation, I'm a bit surprised. And I think some academics are a bit surprised with the timing, especially just as a last point, Gretchen, the court meets en banc on Tuesdays. And the decision seems to have been decided in a special en banc session on Friday for the release of the Sharia bar results. So the timing is a little unusual in my view.
So dapat na-release na ito nung end of day, Tuesday pa lang or Wednesday?
Well, not so much that, no, but we did expect that it wouldn't rule yet last week. There because of the way that the court had to cancel work because of the typhoons in Manila. We thought that it would take more time to deliberate this. In fact, some expected that the court might call for oral arguments, especially because of the number of factual issues that are involved. So we're not surprised that it took long. We're surprised that it took this short, considering the other cases that are also pending before the Supreme Court.
What would have been the big difference here? Kung sakaling nilabas siya during the 20th Congress hearings, na kumbaga parang napag-usapan pa, nabulat-lat pa sana yung issues of constitutionality, wouldn't it have been the same anyway? Since ultimately the Supreme Court is the final arbiter on that.
That's a fair question, right? And it's possible that the court itself would not have changed its mind about the things that it decided, but it may have affected the way that it decided the matter. So when we talk about Supreme Court decisions, it's not the only thing that's important is the dispositive portion or the last part, whether something is unconstitutional or not. The reasoning often is important. And you have here a 97-page decision that really covers perhaps the entire gamut of impeachment, even in my academic view, things that were not really before the court yet, or things that were not raised by the parties before the court. And so if you consider how impeachment cases before the Supreme Court were decided, if you look at the Corona impeachment, for instance, when the Senate has already started trial, the court is a little more careful in stepping in because it acknowledges that the evidence has already come out. The parties are already being heard. The Senate is already exercising its power under the Constitution, the sole power to try and decide cases of impeachment, and therefore it adopts what we would call prudence. It will avoid making broad categorical rulings on things that are already before the Senate, and it might even delay its opinion to allow the Senate some time to decide. So that would have affected the fact that the Senate would have started trial, I think would have affected the way that the court would decide the case.
Well, it would have put public pressure on the Supreme Court you're right, if the evidence is laid before the impeachment court already. Actually, kami rin sa media nagulat na Friday nirelease ito, medyo late na ng araw. Usually, pag weekend, the news is not as aggressive on weekends as we would want them to be. And it is before the SONA of the president. So parang ano na, no? I'm sure the senators could breathe a sigh of relief that they don't have to get into a vote at the very start of the 20th Congress. But let's go to the reasoning. As you mentioned, mahalaga yun. And one sticking point here that seems to be, the pivotal change maker is the clarification on the definition of when an impeachment complaint is deemed initiated. So sabi ni former Supreme Court Justice Adolf Ascuna that in the Davide case, the Supreme Court defined initiating an impeachment complaint as putting it in the order of business and referring it to the proper committee, of which what was absent in the first three complaints, hindi siya na-refer. Kaya the House was operating under that jurisprudence na ganun pa rin. How do things change here? Is that, first of all, allowed, the changing of rules midstream, that now when it is not referred to a committee, it is treated as effectively dismissed?
So let's start with the question of whether that's allowed. Justice Ascuna is absolutely correct that this principle was established already in Francisco versus House of Representatives 2003 case. There is another case, Gutierrez versus Committee on Justice, I think a 2011 case, which says the same thing, right? Initiation is when a complaint is filed before the House and it is referred to the Committee on Justice. And the reason why that was the rule in those cases is that the House should have some prerogative to allow a strong complaint to emerge instead of a frivolous complaint. No? So, ipunin niya muna kung ano yung mga importante na or kung ano yung mga complaint na nahain, tapos doon niya sabay-sabay na ipapasa sa Committee on Justice. That was the rule. Our Supreme Court is bound by what we call na stare decisis. This rule that like cases should be decided in the same way, even if the parties before it are different. And that means that there's a premium that is placed on consistency on the part of the court. We like law to be consistent, and we like decisions of the Supreme Court to be consistent because, as Justice Ascuna has indicated, political actors follow what the Supreme Court says and operate under the current rules that they say. So, however, in a hypothetical scenario, the Supreme Court is allowed to change its mind and say that we got a previous ruling wrong or we need to refine it. But typically, if it will cause an inequitable situation, an unfair situation to the parties who relied on the old ruling, the Supreme Court adopts what we call an operative fact doctrine. So sorry for all of these terms. But basically, that means that the court will not apply the new rule to the current case, and it will apply it for future cases. I think that is what Justice Ascuna was saying, and I absolutely agree with his view that when considering that the House was following the old rules in Francisco and Gutierrez, if the court really wanted to change its mind now or refine the rules, however, whichever way you want to look into this ruling, then it might be fairer to the House who relied on the old ruling to be bound by the old rules or how we used to understand them.
So, operative fact doctrine, kumbaga parang na-establish na natin yung facts noon, and if we operated under those facts, that should hold.
Well, it means that, when the court changes its mind, it doesn't mean that na-erase bigla yung consequences of what has already happened before. So to acknowledge the fact that parties acted under a different understanding of law because of what the Supreme Court has said before, as a matter of fairness, the court would not apply the rule to the present case and just apply it in the future. So to put that into an example now, the House relied on Francisco and Gutierrez versus House. In that case, the House considered the quote-unquote fourth complaint, as not being barred because hindi pa naman nire-refer yung tatlong complaint to the Committee on Justice. And then suddenly you have new rules now in this Duterte versus House decision. If we applied the operative fact doctrine, as Justice Ascuna advocates, then it would be fairer to the House for it to be tested on constitutionality based on what it has done in reliance to the old decision or to the old rule.
Given the tighter definition of initiating an impeachment now, critics worry that dummy impeachment complaints could be filed in the future in order to immunize a sitting official. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, does this open the door to that?
I think in operation it does. The key thing that this new decision does is to create two sets of rules. So you have one set of rule that applies to impeachments initiated by filing complaints with the House. So there's a citizen who files it, or there's a congressman who files it. And another set of rules, so the court would distinguish it with the impeachments that are initiated by a direct vote of one-third of the House of Representatives. So if you read the decision itself, hindi very clear yung point na yun. But the court makes a very emphatic distinction between the two. So if I were a person who wanted to, let's say, kaalyado ko yung isang impeachable officer, what I would do now is simply to initiate a case, file it with the House, and therefore preclude the second mode of initiating impeachment complaints, which is by the one-third vote of the House of Representatives, the one that was done now in the case of Vice President Duterte. Ipepreclude ko na yun, Maghahain ako ng frivolous na complaint kasi in that sense pala, may filing na meron nang nahain na old complaint.
Correct. Okay, bilang panghuli, no, going to the statement of Soljan Florin Hilbay, he said that he argues that the impeachment is designed to be free from judicial interference, that the text, history, and structure of the Constitution's impeachment clauses assign no role for the Supreme Court as an institution. Do you agree with that? At kung ganun, ba't pa tayo nagpunta doon?
So, I understand Soljan Hilbay, who was my constitutional law professor, and his view on this. The Philippine version seems to suggest that the Supreme Court does have a role somehow when it comes to cases of impeachment when there is grave abuse of discretion. And that's something that's in the text of Article 8, Section 1. But I actually agree more with Solicitor General Hilbay that the role of the Supreme Court is very limited. No? And it's really only in very clear cases of grave abuse of discretion and not in cases where there is a plausible excuse on the part of the House. And the reason why that is we go back to American origins of impeachment. In the US, when they were crafting the Constitution, they were trying to decide who would be better to decide impeachment cases. So there was a debate between whether it should be the courts or it should be the Senate. And the Senate won, partly because the impeachment is the only check on the courts, and in our case, the Supreme Court. So if you have the Supreme Court intervening in impeachments, then you open the door to them intervening when they are on trial or when they are being impeached. And that's not really good for our systems of checks and balances.
Okay. Does that mean that the Senate can buckle on this and say that we're not going to follow? Is that possible? Because they have done that in the past. Senate President Jesus Escudero himself has mentioned that kung magrurule itong Supreme Court, pwede nilang pagdesisyonan na sundin at pwede din hindi.
We looked at the Corona impeachment. No? And the Corona impeachment, in that case, there was a temporary restraining order issued by the Supreme Court against the disclosure of foreign currency accounts of Chief Justice Corona. In that case, the Senate eventually decided to follow the TRO. But what's important there is the Senate decided to vote on it. So they understood and asserted that when it comes to impeachment cases, like starting trial, sila yung Supreme. So I would understand why the Senate would follow that. But I also understand concerns that, this might trigger some constitutional crisis because we're used to a situation where the Supreme Court is the last word on questions of constitutionality. And siguro, Gretchen, as a final note, this is precisely why courts are invited to exercise prudence when it comes to impeachment. Whenever a political branch that is supreme in its field, so in the cases of impeachment, supreme yung Senate, whenever that branch is questioned by the Supreme Court, there's always that risk that that branch will not follow. And therefore, when that branch doesn't follow, it harms the long-term legitimacy of the Supreme Court. That apparently hindi pala sa kailangan sundin itong branches na to. So I think what's needed from all sides now and from all our public officers is a little more prudence. To be very mindful of their specific roles in this entire impeachment constitutional process and to act according to accountability. What is the best way to interpret our Constitution that will further that concept?
And therefore, we go back to your original point about timing and this was handed out before the 20th Congress even begins today, even before the senators could put it to a vote. So I guess it's either very questionable or very smart. Okay, maraming salamat sa iyo, Professor Paulo, for joining us and for giving us clarity on the issues that surround the Supreme Court's decision on the constitutionality of the impeachment. Thank you again for joining us from Brazil, and mag-ingat ka. Moving on now to other matters. The southwest monsoon will continue to affect parts of Luzon. That is according to Pag-asa. Ilocos Region, Abra, Benguet, Zambales, and Bataan can expect occasional rains with possible floods and landslides. Metro Manila, Cagayan Valley, Calabarzon, Mindoro, and other areas in Luzon may see scattered rains and thunderstorms. Meanwhile, tropical storm, formerly known as Emong, and Typhoon Rosa will remain outside the Philippine area of responsibility. We shall take a quick break before we head on over to more at the Senate, the House of Representatives, and Malacanang. Please keep it here on One News as we bring you Morning Matters. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters. We are joining you on the morning of the President's fourth State of the Nation address. And joining us now for a closer look at what to expect from President Marcos's fourth SONA is political analyst Aris Arugay. He is the chairman of the UP Diliman Department of Political Science. Magandang umaga sa'yo.
Magandang umaga, Gretchen.
Okay, Professor, let's first set the context of the President's SONA. This is happening after first a disastrous midterm election result for the administration. Second is this comes after the Supreme Court just struck down an impeachment complaint against the president's primary political enemy. And the third important context is this comes after a string of typhoons and a lot of flooding around us. How important is this fourth SONA?
Yes, this is indeed the fourth SONA of President Marcos Jr. So if we're looking at his 6-year term, this is exactly at midpoint, midterm. And what you have mentioned is the political context, and that is something that is not fulfilling the campaign promise of Marcos Jr. and the Unity Team, which is political unity. So instead of political stability, we have instability and borderline institutional crisis given the Supreme Court and the ongoing impeachment process of the Vice President. Gretchen, you haven't mentioned the economy because I was reviewing the previous 3 SONAs of President Marcos Jr., and he always starts with the economy. And unfortunately, many of the economic gains or promises that he has made during his presidential campaign and during the first 3 SONAs remain to be unfulfilled. So you're correct. The weather might be indicative of not only the political storm that the country is facing, but also the very inclement economic conditions, despite certain positive developments. But tama ka, no? Mukhang yung panahon nakikibagay dun sa totoong kondisyon ng bansa natin sa ngayon.
Mm-hmm. What tone do you expect from President Marcos? I mean, people now expect to see results after his 3 years in office. What tone do you expect, especially with the clarity in political lines?
Right. The tone should be something that should show active leadership, decisive leadership, leadership that Filipinos want at this point in our country. And the type of leadership that is expected of a presidential candidate who was able to get a majority of the electorate. Let's remember, only Marcos Jr. was able to do this. No other president was able to get more than 50% of the vote in the presidential elections. So the expectations are great, but whether or not this can be fulfilled, we're already halfway. Kumbaga, hindi na natin mababalik yung past 3 years. So it's a SONA that should be forward-looking, should be a SONA that should communicate a clear message that this president is that the president and his government is under control and is still supposedly on track in fulfilling the great expectations that it has set up for itself.
Siguro kaya naramdaman din ng administrasyon yung pressure to bring on the 20 peso rice promise in any way it could. I mean, right now it is in the Kadiwa stores, definitely heavily subsidized, and knowing that, no, it could go away anytime. But if you take a look at the economy, as you mentioned, inflation is currently down. Despite the setbacks, it is down from 5.82 in 2022, 5.98 in 2023, to 3.21 in 2024. We are seeing year-to-date inflation at 1.8% average for May to June of 2025. Do you think that people realize this, that inflation has gone down, and there's some sort of an improvement in the economy?
Yes, Gretchen, these numbers seem to be great, right? A very low inflation of 1.8%. But to quote the President Marcos's mother, the former First Lady Imelda Marcos, perceptions are real. The truth is not. So even if we have these numbers, the key question is whether they are felt by ordinary Filipinos. And there are surveys that indicate that the government still has to do a lot in terms of addressing inflation. It's still the most pertinent, most important issue that is faced by Filipinos, a majority of Filipinos. And so far, their assessment of the government's efforts remain, there leaves much to be desired to the performance. And yung Kadiwa, I think it should go beyond being symbolic, because at the moment, I do think it is only benefiting a very small minority of the population. So while the government can say that, oh, look, we were already able to fulfill 20 peso kilo rice, but during the campaign in 2022, the promise was that it will be available for everyone, not just for a handful or less than 10% of Filipinos.
Well, perception is indeed king when it comes to this. And at the heart of that is the communication strategy of the president. Do you think there is, an improvement somehow in communications, or medyo talagang nahihirapan pa rin? Where is the president going wrong, and where is he going right?
Right. What the key question to ask is, what is the purpose of communication? Is it really to broadcast or to communicate the truth? Is it to manage perceptions? Is it to conjure falsehoods, or I think or create images that is not really reflective of realities? Politically, we've seen certain developments in the communication strategy of Malacanang, of the government, though it seems to be more combative given the dissolution of the unity. And the rhetoric seems to be that it is fighting fire with fire in addressing the negative comments towards the administration. But Gretchen, let's remember, this government campaigned, or at least President Marcos Jr., when he was running for president, wanted to end politics. So therefore, channeling energies purely on communication and being able to just manage and combat trolls are insufficient, and it remains to be seen whether this communication really reflects accomplishments or really good performance, rather than just merely performing gains and objectives. Kasi sa amin sa political science, may notion of performativity, meaning you don't really work, you just, show people or communicate the message that you are quote unquote working when through visuals, through images, through rhetoric. But whether or not it is really concrete remains to be seen.
Well, the president did try to send a stronger message. After the midterm elections, he asked for the resignation of all of his cabinet secretaries. Pero sa dulo, parang tatlo lang yung talagang major characters doon na napalitan. That is, of course, the Solicitor General Minardo Guevara, Housing Secretary Jerry Acuzar, DENR Secretary Tony Loizaga. Yung iba na nalipat pa sa iba pang departamento. What do you think about that strategy? The president keeping his economic team intact, yun yung unang announcement na ginawa niya, and then removing three major figures in his administration.
Right. Many thought that the supposed cabinet revamp would really be something substantive. But you're correct. In the end, it didn't really materialize into major movements. And therefore, we expect that with very minor changes, this is still a status quo cabinet, a status quo economic team. And therefore, in economics, may notion ng sunk investment. It seems like the Marcos Jr. administration is, or at least President Marcos, is not risking any changes because this is the team that he has already created for his government. So therefore, it remains to be seen whether this team will really deliver. Because in the end, if it does not, then the cabinet revamp really was not really fulfilling the supposed expectation.
Do you think the political dramas overshadowed much of this administration's work? And do you think that the president should talk about anything surrounding the impeachment? Malacanang has already said through Claire Castro that it does not agree. It disagrees with the Supreme Court's ruling.
Yes, because supposedly this government, when it came to power in 2022, sought to rise above partisan politics. Supposedly the unity is to end politicking. But after just a couple of years, we're back to politicking. It's as if we're going back again to that time. Remember in 25 years ago in the Estrada impeachment, and then every year there was an impeachment complaint filed against then President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Is this like Groundhog Day? Are we going year by year? Having this political instability and elite infighting that has no direct impact to the lives of ordinary Filipinos. So, of course, the Supreme Court decision seems to have overshadowed the SONA. No, in terms of the news cycle, Gretchen, if you notice, the SONA today seems to be an afterthought because most of media and everyone is still commenting on the impeachment process. So, in other words, the Dutertes and Sara Duterte seem to have hijacked the news cycle
spotlight
away from supposedly what is to happen today, which is the fourth SONA of President Marcos Jr.
What do you think he should focus on in this fourth SONA? What achievements can he harp on at this point?
I've mentioned this last year that the best SONA is a true SONA. So if the president should tell the truth, should simply tell the people what is the true state of the nation, I think Filipinos have what it takes to accept whatever truth will come out because while the truth may hurt, at least it will set up the necessary process for us to all move forward. Second, I think it should be a forward-looking SONA. It should be something that should catalyze unity, even if we see disunity and a lot of unnecessary infighting among our powerful political leaders at the moment, at the expense of all of us who don't have power. And third, I think it should clearly indicate what still can be done with the remaining years of the Marcos Jr. administration. And somehow rally not only the direct audience, which is the members of the 20th Congress, but Filipinos at large, that this government is still under control, is in control of the country, that this government, it means business, that it is willing to work in the remaining years, it has seriousness of purpose, and that it should not be distracted with political noise and undue criticism from political actors. And finally, that it should not engage in unnecessary politicking, because while we all can walk and chew gum at the same time, this government needs to have laser sight focus on realizing the many campaign promises that President Marcos has promised when he ran for president in 2020.
Well, one of those promises is the Build Better More promise, with nearly 9 trillion worth of infrastructure projects approved. With what you're seeing now, do you think they are delivering on this end? We do see improvements at the NAIA. Napag-uusapan din syempre ngayon yung flood control system natin, which senators and many lawmakers are questioning saan napunta yung pera. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, sinabi rin ni DPWH Secretary na they have at least 5,000 projects that they have already finished in terms of flood control, pero most of them are to give immediate relief to those affected by floods.
Gretchen, nandun na tayo, no? I think in terms of flood control projects, in terms of funding, it's quite clear that the government has invested on this. But the presence of flood control projects cannot be the barometer on whether or not they're effective. And the question remains whether these projects really address the problem at hand. And at the moment, there seems to be they seem to be insufficient. Meaning, there needs to be a new ways and new approaches of dealing with the effects of climate change and the effects of these uncertain weather patterns that goes beyond simply flood control, because we've heard the scientists and the climatologists. Flood control might just be a band-aid fix, but what is really needed is some forward strategic thinking about how we can rescue urban centers like Manila, because we might have a lot of flood control mechanisms, but if overcapacity and in terms of climate change mitigation, we're not addressing those, then it's not really a holistic approach to the problem at hand.
Last year, he got a standing ovation on announcing the POGO ban. Do you expect the same with online gambling? Do you think he will announce his policy on this, or is it not too popular of a move? What is your read on that?
Well, the debate on this needs to be weighed accordingly, because it seems like the government is relying on the moral element, meaning that last year that POGOs are bringing in crime, bringing in unnecessary suffering for ordinary Filipinos. If this will be the same approach as online gambling, this might be, again, highly limited, because if you're going to ban online gambling and not really address actors or entities that benefit from it, therefore, you might ban it at the rhetorical level, but in the Philippines, when you ban something, there are always exceptions to the rule. So the problem is really implementation. And banning this on the basis of simply getting a standing ovation, I think, should be the least factor to be considered, but should be evidence-based and should be studied carefully to what extent this is really disadvantageous and have negative impacts to our society.
Okay. I guess the final question here is, I mean, if you were to advise the president on which path he should take, he does have 3 years left as president, and one would think that he think about the years after that. I mean, his own survival in this climate, knowing that he already made a lot of enemies. With the Duterte arrest, with his policies on going after policemen in the drug war. Ano kaya ang may aasahan natin? Do you think the president will go full throttle on these policies, or do you expect him to take a step back, to relax a bit on how he has dealt with their political enemies?
Gretchen, when President Marcos Jr. assumed power, the notion was that it was a restoration of the Marcos family, meaning that this, and in fact even members of their family said that they are lucky to be given this second chance. So therefore, and indeed, it is really quite fortunate for the Marcos family to be able to go back to power, even despite what history has rendered and has taught all of us. So therefore, if I am President Marcos Jr., I think I would clearly think that this is not just about me. It's about the legacy of the Marcos family, and think heavily and think seriously how history will judge them. History has already judged them, but sabi ko nga, they're very lucky to be given a second chance to be rejudged, reevaluated. And therefore, the burden is that in the remaining 3 years, how will they create this legacy, so much so that history will judge them differently this time. It's a huge burden, huge responsibility, but after all, they are the ones who volunteered to come back to power. They were not forced to do this. No one's forcing them, and therefore they have every choice in ensuring that this time around that they will leave a legacy that will not leave a bitter taste in the mouths of Filipinos.
Well said, well said. And he has 3 years to shape that legacy and that narrative. In the meantime, we await the President's fourth of the State of the Nation address. Maraming salamat to our political analyst, Professor Aris Arugay, for joining us today and weighing in.
Thank you.
All eyes are on President Bongbong Marcos as he delivers his fourth State of the Nation address today, July 28. What will he say and what will he leave out? Join One News for an all-day special coverage from the opening of the 20th Congress to the President's speech, all the way to in-depth post-SONA analysis.
The state of the nation is sound.
The campaign against illegal drugs continues, but it has taken on a new face.
Effective today, all POGOs are banned.
Dumating na po ang bagong Pilipinas.
What is the state of the nation according to President Bongbong Marcos? Gains, game plan, hits, misses. SONA 2025, a One News special coverage. All-day coverage. Anchored by Ces Orena Drilon and Regina Lay. Real-time reports on the ground. Anchors at large. Seasoned journalists' points of view. And in-depth analysis.
Mga minamahal kong kababayan.
This is the fourth State of the Nation address. Live coverage and analysis. Monday, July 28, 3 p.m. only on One News. All sides, all the time.
And that wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters. We hope we've given you the right start to your morning. Let's go ahead and make the day matter. My name is Gretchen Ho. We are One News, all sides, all the time.